Hello and welcome to episode 28 of Malcolm Show. So this week I've been thinking about various ways to describe the ontological constraints from which our universe exists. And I've started with the idea of framing it from the perspective of constants as far as we're concerned, from a social construct perspective of an economy, a market, a society and theory. So an economy, somewhat self-descriptively, is the economic paradigm, well, not necessarily descriptively, it's the paradigm through which we monitor social behaviour in a quantified manner via conduits locally described as money. In sociological terminology, it would be the principle of, in a market, an economy relates to a market in the sense that a market is a framework from which life generally interfaces with as a means of exchanging ideas of semantically assigned value in order to either raise funding for personal gain or social gain, the differentiation being explicit personal gain and indirect personal gain because of the implicated social gain. Of course, it is reasonably defensible that the idea of social gain is in itself a personal gain because of the affordance in social gain providing personal gratification. Okay, so social gain is the general idea. And personal gain, if you consider it as a micro and a social gain as a macro, the further we can differentiate economies from markets, the clearer we can make that picture. So for anybody who's new to my podcast, essentially this is a studying podcast and I'm thinking out loud stuff that is either directly relevant to my consumer behaviour and marketing undergraduate degree, tangentially related to my economic and social history masters, or otherwise connected to my intended doctorate, as well as similarly related to my studies more generally, which generally speaking I would say are quantitative analysis of the social sciences. So as much as I find human behaviour fascinating, I've also got a keen interest in, I've got a passing interest in computer science, find economics interesting, linguistics specifically, mathematics I find utterly brilliant even if it is somewhat confusing sometimes, neuroscience very interesting, physics fascinating stuff, psychology and sociology are quite cool, I enjoy systems massively and I'm a very big fan of cybernetics, and part of the reason for me doing this podcast is to improve my ability to think in systems, because the nature of a chess set is a consistent system through which there is a clear objective, aka checkmate. So if I can figure out specifically the patterns most conducive with accomplishing checkmate, then I improve my systems thinking operationality, which sometimes begins simply with linguistic verbosity as a means of expressing my internal narrative, because the further that dialogue goes into linguistic complexity, the more sophisticated my imbrication of ideas becomes. And the more sophisticated my imbrication of ideas become, the clearer my syntactic patterns become. For instance, my grammatical interfacing of repeating a concept before continuing again, I would say is at an overlapping point of finding a pattern somewhere, because I've repeated in my head that there's a pattern worth noticing. So the question is, why is that coming to mind right now? Is it simply aesthetically interesting because of that and that, or is it architecturally interesting as well? So my writing today was focusing on the ontological premise of simulation hypothesis in combination with the idea of the singularity. So if I think more along the lines of, if this were the singularity, how do I develop this into the structure of a desirable simulation? And that's a very unusual move. Okay. It's a very unusual move. Pardon me a minute. Oh, Malcolm. Okay, so first, take that. You can take that if you want. Take this. Threaten checkmate. Return fire. Consolidate. Consolidate. It'll move the pawn, so I want to do that, possibly. Okay, so I've discovered that the level of chess that I can comfortably play whilst thinking about what I've been writing in a day is approximately level 5, aka difficulty 850. So, if that's the difficulty we find manageable, then clearly I need to figure out how these patterns overlap with my understanding, with my comprehension, when I'm not concentrating specifically on chess. Bang. 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 Ah, yes. Oh, yes, of course. Okay, so that was relatively simple when I stopped talking explicitly about what I'm studying, which is good and bad. It shows us where that limit is. Okay. So in terms of systems thinking, that means the level of cognitive exertion necessary to achieve distraction is So if we continue doing this at softer levels, we get less reward, but we get better studying done. Okay, so if we play it slower at the earlier levels, or continue the earlier levels, it should all work out quite smoothly. And let's see if this refreshes yours. Oh dear. That is an issue, isn't it? Okay, so let's see what we can do about that. How very peculiar. Apparently the review function is down. Well, that's not great, is it? Okay, well let's put that there for now. And then open new tab. Oh. Can we access the website at all? Oh, that is an issue, isn't it? Let's try the classic. Is it an issue on this end? No. No, internet's connected. Definitely connected. How unusual. Well, if that's the way you're going to behave, then we might just go to the chess. Okay. So, leave that there for now. I've no idea how Lichess compares, so we'll see how we get on with level 1 and take it from there. Okay. Now, as I was saying, the idea of the marketing interface being eponymous with the ontological interface effectively gives us the parameters to draw well, it's not even that. It's the idea of thinking of an economy and a society as conceptually similar ideas, such that the interface available to a marketer working in either knowing themselves to be working within a simulation or in a confirmed singularity, which for the sake of this conversation are functionally similar, acknowledged as separate entities, just conceptually similar enough that we'll group them as a pairing for now. And the idea that I had as a consequence was that in a sufficiently sophisticated technological environment, a digital interface such as a singularity or an operationally viable simulation, pardon me, everything is marketing at that point. Literally everything. Now the tricky part is validating that with any sort of evidence, so I'm going to have to look through the literature and make sure I have some really strong premises to support my argument. However, I think it's logically sound to define anything within a digital environment as, at the very minimum, having potential of being a marketing interface. Now, if it's a marketing interface, it is also a narrative interface. And if it's a narrative interface, then it can be a conduit of rhetoric. And if it's a conduit of rhetoric, then it is able to persuade. And if it's able to persuade, then it is effectively a conversation. And a conversation might not necessarily be overt in its persuasiveness, it can be very subliminal. So, phrasing the subliminal nature of a conversational interface as being that from which conversion occurs. Hooray. Okay, so let's look. I've not used this in quite a while, so pardon me if I explore the features here. Request a computer analysis. I might have an account. We will find out. Jolly good. Oh, would you look at that? Okay, so what's on this? That's there. That's all that, so do that later. Future analysis. So if everything is marketing and we're in a marketing interface, then every behavior we have, as well as being an economic behavior and a sociological behavior or societal behavior, sociological and societal, it's compatible with both, as well as being an economic or societal behavior, as well as a confirmation of the correct theory of everything, if there is a correct theory of everything. In other words, you know, whether it be string theory or loop quantum gravity or one of the religions actually got it spot on, whichever way you look at it, there'll be some final answer confirming how, oh that's good, confirming how all of it pieces together. So if we understand how it all pieces together as yeah, but I want to know, there must be more than just those. Oh. Well, let's just put that and that. Don't know that just yet. Apparently that was 98x, so cool. One inaccuracy. Sorry, the flow's all a bit peculiar today. I wonder why. Okay. What does this do? Okay. So if everything is being marketed within an economy and every marketing behavior is simultaneously generating economic behavior, that looks book. Well, that's definitely book, so I'll put at least 3. We can deal with the rest of that later. So, sorry, I'm a little bit thrown by the Lichess interface, so hold with me as I figure out. If we accept the premise that we're in a simulation, or the singularities and eventuality that we're already preparing for, then every business that plans to continue operating during the conversion of biological to digital has to accept that the frameworks they're working with, whether that be from pure economics principle, or you're in the marketing department somewhere and you're trying to think how you're going to get the message out, or you're thinking from more of a corporate social responsibility perspective and you want to ensure that the ethical behaviour, one, actually helps society, two, doesn't cause unnecessary drawbacks, because this sort of technology is so advanced that there isn't a great deal of precedent to base practices on, which to a degree can be thought of as a potential for exploitation. Then of course the counter argument to that is, well, then don't sign up for the service. But the counter argument to that is people haven't been taught how dangerous these services are. That's the tricky element to it. Is I really think, generally speaking, the internet is simultaneously far more dangerous and far safer than it ever has been. So to a degree that if you spend all your time on the surface web, whether that be, generative chatbots or chat rooms, or, chat rooms is very vague. So let's say generative chatbots, social media, streaming media, those big three places where it's basically so well policed that it's kind of like walking through a gated community in the middle of the day. And chat rooms, depending on what the chat room, I mean, if you're thinking of the like Reddit-y kind of chat room, still, I wouldn't fool yourself into thinking that Reddit's safe. It can be, and I would argue that a grown adult meeting somebody on that website probabilistically will meet somebody kind, depending on how well they vet the person and whether or not it's a vulnerable person doing the request and all that sort of thing. There are many variables, so I don't want to speculate beyond the scope of what I'm trying to discuss here. The principle of the matter I'm trying to get at is that because of the ubiquitousness of marketing in everything that's going on, there's an advert everywhere. I mean, right now, you've seen 2 chess platform adverts already. I've seen them as well. I've seen the advert for the brand name of the paper I'm writing on, the pens I'm writing with, the laptops around me, as well as, if you look at any of the books in your room, if they're part of a series such as the 4 Dummies series or the Teach Yourself series, or it's the certain publisher, like Penguin, Routledge, all of it. There's a lot of adverts all the time. That's part of a marketing campaign, is the branding going on. So everything you're looking at, everything is specifically designed to attract your attention in such a way that reinforces a positive image of the brand. And that's the entire idea of marketing, is to constantly present those ideas. Oh, I should have gone straight up, should I? So, what's that? Boom. Boom. Then you go there, don't you? Good. Interesting. Anywho, so considering that idea that we live in a sufficiently immersive environment that the marketing literature, marketing materials are already so pervasively integrated with our life that we don't necessarily notice it, combine the idea of these really, really, really sophisticated technologies. They're able to calculate and forecast behavior so far ahead of time that they track your behavior with such precision that the forecasts, I'd have to check an exact date of it, although I'm very certain that the forecasting available is months. And I think I would honestly put that as a conservative estimate. I think it's not unreasonable that all of these technologies are able to forecast behaviour seasons ahead of time. Years does not in the slightest alarm me. I feel that the amount of data available and the fact that these businesses have been around for decades really reinforces that fact. It's kind of inescapable to go out anywhere in Europe or North America and probably most of Asia without meeting somebody that has. Don't get me wrong, there's people in like Africa, South America as well. I'm just trying to like validate my statement with certainty instead of high probability. Is anywhere you go in the world these days, apart from maybe some uncontacted tribes or some very some rural people, such as like Aborigines or other like Native Americans, that sort of thing. Again, this is me speculating from what I've heard from conversation or read in a book or seen on a TV program. It's the idea that apart from very, very rural people, everybody has heard of social media, and most people have social media to some degree. They either have a Facebook account and they don't use it much anymore, or they had accounts and then deleted them, or they're on them every day. Some people spend so much time on them that they became a professional at using them. Some people are professionals with them by virtue of their employer saying, you gotta do this. The point is the pervasive permeations, the consistency of the ubiquity is just everywhere. And when you think about that from a digital interface's perspective, such as simulation theory or the singularity, I feel it's then essential to consider that we were already in, as if you follow Bostrom's idea of the hypothesis Bostrom's hypothesis, we were already in a simulation if we ever are, then we have to accept that everything we're doing is part of a marketing campaign. So then the question from that then becomes, who was the originator of the marketing campaign? Was it something that we had a degree of willpower over, which, if you follow George Hotz's ideas, probably not. And I'd support that to a degree because I think the idea of willpower is amorphous in the same way that the nature, nurture, and reductionism, holism ideas of psychology, all three of those concepts are very amorphous. The absolutism of having one or the other is possible, and if we're in a simulation, then no, we do not have willpower. There's no such thing as nature. You just have your presets, and pardon me, your nature is a result of those presets, and any nurturing done to them is a consequence of the simulation responding to the input. Now, to some degree, we have been told that we have volition over the singularity or the simulation or the digital interface, for a general term on it, is... How do I play another game here? That one. What if I do that? There we go. There we go. There we go. Today is the white pieces. Put that on 3. Put that on 2. Put that over there. And go. Then, to me, it's just sort of obvious. And I don't mean that in any sort of arrogant manner, I just... or even in a take my word without me saying anything more manner. It just feels that human behaviour is so predictable that one of I feel the strongest arguments against us being in a simulation is really similar to the idea of the insistence that humans are in any way special. We just aren't. We're just a form of life. And as with any form of life in the galaxy, we will contribute as best we can, maybe get off the planet, maybe populate a few more planets, maybe we start developing, becoming interplanetary and interstellar species, which I think is quite cool. I'm certainly on board to help achieve that. I think the important choice we need to make as a species is figuring out what exactly we want to do with the knowledge of being in a simulation means in terms of frankly put, the power it affords us. Because if we're quite aware that we're being given power to control a simulation, then we're also accepting that the power we're being granted can be taken away from us. It's being distributed at the behest of something that has the power to give or take away that power. So this is where the notion of a superintelligence known as God or the supercomputer, or super intelligent human beings, or an extraterrestrial species. There's loads of different ways this might happen. I think the important concept to keep in mind is humans aren't necessarily the only species worth keeping alive, and the only reason that we might be alive in the first place is as a form of entertainment for a quote-unquote higher species. So if the higher species, let's say, I don't know what you want to, there's the little green men, or the greys, or there's lots of different ideas about what aliens exist, what extraterrestrial life exists. To me, it's a matter of figuring out, of those life forms, which of them are specifically making effort, which of them are specifically contributing positively to the premise of, and I'm trying not to overcomplicate this as much as I'm trying to speak specifically. I recognise I have a tendency to sort of overfit my language, however, I'd much prefer to be accurate and develop precision as I continue than misequate a sense of casualness for social aptitude. To me, the necessary causality that arrives as a consequence of at least the premise of willpower is we have been trusted with willpower. If we're in a simulation and the evidence against the simulation is about as conclusive as the evidence for the simulation, in my opinion, honestly, from what I've seen, humans are so predictable that we may as well already be living in some kind of simulation. And seeing how consistent nature's laws are with various mathematical principles such as the Fibonacci spiral, the Lucas spiral, all these various geometries and proportions, it's suspiciously accurate. it's the okay. I see what you've done. You're doing your best to, figure everything out and be okay. It's it's too mathematically precise. That's the thing about reality, is it's how consistently correct mathematics is. Because it's always mathematics just explains everything so, as Edward Wotton put it, unreasonably well. It is unreasonably powerful at describing everything. So the principle of, as I remember watching George Hotz's talk called Jailbreaking Simulation, is he tied in this idea of it's really easy to imagine universes with a different physics. It's very hard to imagine a universe with different math. So considering people like Ed Witten have been talking about this sort of stuff for years from different perspectives, and I feel when Ed Witten mentioned music in the same sentence as string theory, he either had a similar idea to one I've had regarding string theory and where's the review button? And music theory is overlapping, and you could even argue that the strings of string theory are just vibrating the chords of a symphony or some sort of orchestral performance conducted through the universe. To me, it just sort of seems obvious that the consistency of mathematical accuracy for describing things once we understand what we're looking at, if we're in a simulation, then we've been given mathematical tools of sufficient comprehensiveness to cogently and cohesively connect patterns in such a way that we can see a puzzle and solve a sufficient amount of the puzzle to satiate our curiosity, which then gives me the question, don't know what that did. Oh, that's what it is. Right. Which then I feel leads to the question, why would we be given the mathematical tools to figure out this degree of our reality if it wasn't within the power of our simulation's operating system and its operator to keep us entertained, or at least see what happens when a self-aware software program is given instructions that command it to behave as if it has willpower and is put into an environment with sufficient safety that people can be adventurous and yet enough competition that there is excitement. Where the hell did the review button go? Oh, was that it? Apologies. Apparently it's 100% accurate. That seems... There we go. Don't get me wrong, I'm very much on board with the possibility of 100% accuracy. I'm just impressed that it thinks I was 100% accurate. Okay, 89%, that's a prime number. Okay. So Just put that as it is for now. So, if we're in a simulation and we've been granted sufficient autonomy that we think we have willpower, then the mathematics we have are at least compatible with this level of the simulation, which means they must be consistent outside the simulation to a degree, even if the system at hand is cryptological in nature, cryptographic. Because if the mathematical system at work is a consistent system within the simulation, then out with the simulation, it must be catalogued somewhere as a representation of how the internal system works, which means if it's catalogued somewhere as a representation of how the internal system works, then it's either effectively reducible to a cipher of an existing system out with the simulation, or as a continuation of true mathematics throughout the simulation. Because, I remember once hypothesizing that maybe we've got the order of the operations the other way around, and if we're in a simulation, maybe outside the simulation, the correct order of operations is addition, then subtraction, then multiplication, then division, then exponents and roots. I'm fully aware that I'm aware that within our level of simulation, the correct order of operations can be abbreviated as PEMDAS or BODMAS. The question is, if we do exist in a simulation, then what was the point of letting us know we're in a simulation? Was it just to see how we respond? But then it's the idea that if there's a God, why did God let us know that God exists? That's the question. That's not a bad question, actually. So I feel, perhaps, if God created us all, maybe he just wanted credit. Because God letting us know that God exists necessitates our belief that whatever told us God was real was telling the truth. As well as the idea that the faith placed in the truth teller was correctly placed, and if the truth teller's behaviour was correctly placed, then why has it been so difficult to convince everybody else? I would argue that's the notion of free will demonstrating itself, and at the same time, if we're given that free will from an omnipotent God or supercomputer or extraterrestrial species or humans from the future, the idea of us being in the Matrix and it operating in a way similar to the Truman Show. For those who are unfamiliar with the Matrix and the Truman Show, those are films that depict alternative forms of simulated reality. The Matrix being similar with this computer idea, Truman Show being the character lives on an island where everybody in the town is in on it, and the in on it that they are in on is the premise of a TV show which is broadcast to the rest of the world. Hello viewer, Yuvia. Well, how are you? So if the simulation operators allow us to know we're in a simulation in the same way that God lets us know that God exists, there has to be a purpose for them telling us that, because otherwise it would be reducible from an anthropic principle to be something similar to the idea of hubris. They needed us to know that we were their owners. They needed us to know that they were our owners, something to that effect. Because, well, I mean, economically speaking, if you operate the entire substrate through which a debatably conscious life form exists, then you are the owner of that, or at least, pardon me, contributing to the owner's sustenance of said substrate. Okay. So if it's just a substrate being operated on, then we're not, oh yeah, let's check my well. Yep. Again, it's checkmate. Oh. Maybe it's just business. And giving us consciousness makes it all more entertaining for whoever our simulated reality is being streamed to or for. Thanks for watching, viewers. I hope you've all enjoyed everything going on today. I'll have a quick look at chess.com to see if that's working any better now, and we can review the game. There we go. Right, let's see what happened. So, seven, 8, 3, 0. Okay. So if we do live... Okay, I wasn't expecting this to be up and running, so let's continue, finish this on-stream fuel. If we do live in a simulation, and we've been told that we live in a simulation, or we've just come to the conclusion... The thing is, even if we've come to the conclusion organically, if we live in a sufficiently sophisticated technology that can perpetrate the illusion of an economy, functioning as a market, functioning as a society, functioning as a theory, then collectively we're all behaving in accordance with the instructions given to us via the simulation. So even if you feel the idea is something emergent from a stochastic process, I pronounce that correct, stochastic? Yeah. I disagree with stochasm as a principle. I think no matter how sophisticated your number generator is, it still works on an algorithm, and that algorithm has preferences and or bandwidths, however you describe it. Eventually there'll be a pattern. You might need 1 billion years to identify it, and a string of quantum computers longer than the observable universe, there's still a pattern. So, continuing the idea of everything being marketing, then perhaps that's just part of the entertainment of the ontological consumption cycle, is that we necessarily as humans have pleasure receptors, because as far as we're aware it's an evolutionary necessity that helps us figure out the best things we can do to perpetuate the species as per our survival instincts. So if our survival instinct is effectively governed in part by pleasure-seeking systems, as well as pain prevention and or avoidance systems, then from a marketing perspective, things that are painful can be used as negative reinforcement, things that are pleasurable can be used as positive reinforcement, and in a comprehensive marketing interface such as that of a simulation or singularity, it becomes akin with the idea of a narrative. So whoever released the information to us in the first place clearly wanted us to be aware that we were in a system compatible with the concept of narrative and therefore other linguistic premise. So if linguistically speaking we accept we are in a narrative, and the narrative has syntactic correctness and or incorrectness, then as soon as we understand what correctness is, we can continue aligning with correctness until it no longer serves our purpose and we understand the parameters or the parenthesis governing the degree of application relevant to that correctness. In the same way that if you get the order of operations correct with a mathematical operation, you get the correct answer. If you misinterpret the usage of parentheses, then you can give yourself the incorrect answer unintentionally. In the same way that if you get your grammar or punctuation wrong in linguistics, which would be the same idea as, it's going well, thank you, how are you? When you're writing, whether it's English, French, Mandarin, Russian, Venezuelan, or in mathematics or any sort of logical notation, then there must be a premise for fueling that system. Because no matter what the universe is made of, it has to be fueled by some sort of energy system. So this is where the idea of fuel economy becomes really interesting to me, because fuel economy and the idea of all life necessarily has to eat something. And no matter how my ELO in correspondence is, according to chess.com, about 1200. In rapid it's I think 1000, and I wouldn't think it's any more than that. So marketing principles, it's the idea of what are we being marketed, why are we being marketed to, because scaling that up from the local environment of Earth's GDP to be inclusive of either the universe as a component of a multiverse or as a simulation. If you're happy with that, good for you. If you keep training, you can get better. Then ontologically speaking, the purpose of marketing is simply communication for the sake of recognition, because marketing deliberately intends to notify its observers that the materials being distributed have an origin that desires interface. So if the brand origin necessarily requires correspondence, because why else would you market something if you don't want people to speak with you, then there must necessarily be something marketed and something somebody marketed to. So even if it's just the business and the customer, then that insists on a duality. So if the sense of a duality is insisted upon by ontological continuity, or cosmological necessity, or metaphysical probability, or philosophical choice, however you want to phrase that. What should I have done? Yep, I saw. Then, as soon as we differentiate the sources of marketing, such as martial arts marketing from mathematics marketing, from sexually based marketing, then we figure out what's influencing us most. Now obviously those three items right there are sort of self-referential adverts that I've put forward because they're just things that interest me. So there must be some sort of basis to the idea of marketing as a universal construct. Okay, cool. Thank you very much for watching, everybody. I hope you've had a lovely time. I appreciate that I do tend to think to myself quite a bit. My goal on Twitch is to study as helpfully as I can to achieve my goals of first class honours undergraduate degree, then master's degree, then PhD, undergraduates with the University of Reading, master's degree from the University of Oxford, PhD probably Oxford, maybe somewhere else. We'll see where my career is at that point. For now, the alignment goal would be to do it with Oxford, because I would like to teach at Oxford or a similarly elite institution such as Cambridge, Harvard, MIT, Princeton, Stanford, Yale, that kind of Oxbridge Ivy League level. I'm interested in pushing as far as I can with this sort of stuff. I really enjoy theory in almost all of its forms, and apparently have a penchant for philosophy. So, I need to get on with my real life responsibilities. As much as this is real life, I'm considering this virtual in comparison. I hope you've all enjoyed watching. Have a lovely day, have a lovely week, have a lovely month. I will see you next time. Please comment on the post, tell me what you're interested in, like the video, share it with friends, subscribe to the channel, praise it on every social media platform you can think of, and yeah, cheers. Bye.